The ASEAN summit opened doors this past weekend, and President Yoon Suk-yeol took the opportunity to share his Indo-Pacific strategy for regional stability and prosperity. So what is South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy? What issues took center stage at the ASEAN summit this time around? And what dominated talks under the broader ASEAN-led summits, including the ASEAN Plus 3 and the East Asia Summit? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It was a busy weekend for regional leaders, including President Yoon Suk-yeol, amid the ASEAN-led summits and high-level bilateral interactions over in Cambodia. For more, I have Professor KIM Dong-yeob at the Busan University of Foreign Studies live on the line. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
Right. I also have Joanne LIN WEILING at the ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute joining the session virtually as well. Joanne, it's good to have you on.
Thank you.
Professor Kim, let's begin with a few words on the history of the ties between South Korea and the ASEAN.
Well, we know that the ASEAN was established in 1967, and the Korea-ASEAN relationship started in 1989 as sectoral dialogue partners. And this relationship upgraded to full dialogue partners in 1991. And 1997, during the regional financial crisis, we have the ASEAN Plus 3 summit, and the first ASEAN ROK summit was held during the time. And 2004, both parties agreed to be the comprehensive cooperation partnership. And also 2007, ASEAN and Korea signed the FTA, Free Trade Agreement. And 2010, both parties became the strategic partnership. And finally, we know very well about the new Southern policy, which was announced previous government in 2017. And the main focus of the Korea-ASEAN relationship evolved from economic and security cooperation to a very wide range of cooperation, such as cultural exchanges and people-to-people exchanges. Especially previous government, under the new Southern policies, our policy toward the ASEAN was expanded and upgraded under the vision of future-oriented ASEAN-Korea communities. And regarding the trade volume between these two parties, the Korea-ASEAN both are very important trading partners one another. In 2021, the trade volume between ASEAN and Korea recorded $176.5 billion US. It is about 18% of Korean total foreign trade. Now, the ASEAN is the ROK's, Korea's second largest trading partner, and also the second largest foreign investment destination. So it means that the ASEAN is very essential trading partner for Korea.
Right. And beyond Korea's ties with the ASEAN, Joanne, broadly speaking, what issues took center stage during the ASEAN-led summits this past weekend?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. So there were certainly many key issues that were discussed against the backdrop of a more uncertain world, both geopolitically and economically. So I think within ASEAN, there were two key issues that were discussed. Myanmar was one of the main agendas in which ASEAN leaders made decisions on the way forward in addressing the Myanmar crisis. So another was in regards to Timor-Leste's application for ASEAN membership. And after more than 10 years of consideration, ASEAN leaders granted, in principle, approval to admit Timor-Leste as the 11th member of ASEAN, and that was actually quite a big announcement. So other issues that were discussed between ASEAN and its dialogue partners, including with South Korea, includes the importance of the Indo-Pacific, as you had mentioned, the ongoing war in Ukraine, which has clearly undermined a rule-based international order, the situation in the South China Sea, the recent surge in North Korea's missile testing, and of of course, the impact of the US-China rivalry on ASEAN. So the leaders also highlighted the importance of addressing other economic challenges such as inflationary pressures, increase in food and energy prices, supply chains disruptions, and climate change, among many other things.
Right. And Joanne, in the case of Myanmar, what have been the broader implications of the ASEAN's inability to promote a peace plan there, very briefly speaking?
Yes. ASEAN is aware that the situation in Myanmar remains very fragile with continuous escalation of violence. So this is despite the best of ASEAN's efforts. And this has in a way cast doubts on ASEAN's credibility and reputation as an organization to resolve regional issues, particularly within the bloc itself. So due to the lack of progress in implementing the 5-point consensus, ASEAN leaders and foreign ministers had very candid discussions to review its strategies on the way forward, and ASEAN has decided to put in place a concrete and practical implementation plan with measurable indicators, specific timeline to support its 5-point consensus. So ASEAN will also continue to ban Myanmar's political representatives from attending ASEAN summits and the foreign ministers meeting, and perhaps this could be extended to other sectors in the future. So on the humanitarian front, I think ASEAN will also be stepping up assistance and working closely with the United Nations. However, I think it remains to be seen if these new decisions will actually really make any difference to the situation in Myanmar.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Kim, President Yoon Suk-yeol chose the ASEAN platform to share his Indo-Pacific strategy. What do you feel this particular decision, and what are your thoughts on the President's regional strategy?
Well, perhaps the Yoon Suk-yeol government, which is only 6 months after its inauguration, tried to find a venue to announce its key foreign policy objectives. And probably found the ASEAN summit would be the good platform to unveil its diplomatic vision. And also, Yoon administration tried to gain a sympathy from ASEAN leaders on the Indo-Pacific strategy, which is not very different from what it says in the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. But I think it was not well received by the ASEAN leaders. Perhaps the ASEAN leaders expected from President Yoon to deliver ASEAN-focused policy, which would be an upgraded version of New Southern policy. Of course, there was an ASEAN-focused proposal, so-called Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, but it was not. It was no new and clear version or plan for the future relationship. But there's no new and furthermore, it was overshadowed by its pronouncement of the Indo-Pacific strategy, so in which ASEAN was not the major players. So anyway, both Indo-Pacific strategy and the Korea-ASEAN Solidarity initiatives are not well conceptualized. So I think the Yoon administration need more time to make it a concrete foreign policy framework in the near future.
Right, I see. And keeping in mind Professor Kim's thoughts, Joanne, do you suppose that there is no common ground between Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy and the ASEAN's core mission?
I don't think so. I mean, I have yet to see the actual strategy. It was only just an announcement. But I think this will be interesting because South Korea will be at least the 5th or the 6th dialogue partner of ASEAN to actually have an Indo-Pacific strategy after countries like the US, Japan, India, and the EU. So as Professor Kim has mentioned, I'm sure ASEAN would welcome the Indo-Pacific strategy of South Korea to be free, peaceful, and prosperous. So I think, in fact, it was stated in the chairman's statement that South Korea will work closely with ASEAN to support the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN's central role in the region. So during the summit, I think President Yoon has highlighted key values such as the importance of a rule-based international order, respect for sovereignty, inclusivity, and the promotion of dialogue, which are important principles under the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. So I think as such, I think there's definitely scope to explore areas of synergy for both sides to understand substantive cooperation in areas like maritime and economic cooperation, connectivity, and sustainable development, among others. And I think South Korea can also utilize platforms like the ASEAN Plus 3, East Asia Summit, and the ASEAN Regional Forum to actually implement cooperation under the Indo-Pacific banner.
Right, and speaking about the ASEAN Plus 3 Summit, Professor Kim, what were your takeaways from this particular meeting in Cambodia, the ASEAN Plus 3 Summit, which includes South Korea, Japan, and China, of course?
Yes, probably in these meetings, the ASEAN's main concern at this meeting, at this moment, would be the economic recovery from the damages caused by the pandemics. So there was a Chinese proposal was well received by the ASEAN leaders. In fact, the ASEAN Plus 3 mechanism was born out of the 1997 regional financial crisis. So it is nature that the issue of economic cooperation was the main menu on the discussion tables. But it is also true that any vision of economic cooperation or development could not be real if the regional peace and stability were not secured. So in this context, the Korea's claim for the North Korea's nuclear and missile issues need to be discussed in these regional gatherings. And the Korea's government has the constructive roles in these issues from the regional actors, especially China and ASEAN.
Right, of course. Joanne, the East Asia Summit, which includes the US and Russia, is yet another, of course, important gathering within the broader ASEAN framework, and perhaps even more now given the situation in Ukraine. Do you suppose the East Asia Summit can play a more productive role in promoting peace and ultimately prosperity?
Yes, definitely. I think the East Asia Summit is one of the most important ASEAN-led mechanisms, and it allows ASEAN to bring together these important global players to find solutions to global crises and to promote peace and prosperity in the region. So, for example, the 17th East Asia Summit yesterday included a special discussion on food and energy security and briefings by the President of the European Council, Ursula von der Leyen, and the Secretary General of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So issues like post-pandemic recovery, energy cooperation, digital connectivity, and of course political issues like the surge in the North Korea's missile testing were definitely high on the agenda. So however, I think as much as the EAS hopes to build greater strategic trust, issues that are exacerbated by its very own members, such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as you mentioned, and the US-China rivalry will remain a challenge within this platform. And of course, the last thing ASEAN wants is for the platform to become another channel for finger pointing or for major powers to express displeasure, at each other. So I think in this sense, the chair of ASEAN should actually play a stronger role in controlling the agenda of the meeting.
Right. Professor Kim, in recent days, doubts have been raised about the relevance of the ASEAN. I mean, given the host of geopolitical challenges it faces, what are your thoughts on its relevance, very briefly speaking?
Well, at this moment, ASEAN is facing a tough time to keep up its relevance, mainly because of the internal problems and global power competition and also economic difficulties. Probably it could be worse in the coming years. Some say that the ASEAN convening power is insufficient to command tensions when it comes to real-world politics. But still, we have to recognize the role of ASEAN in keeping the regional peace and prosperity during the last 55 years since its establishment. In fact, ASEAN has moved slowly but steady pace. Perhaps this trait made ASEAN survive and sustain as a regional bloc and provide constantly a platform for the regional and global issues under its centrality. For Korea, I think we have no better partner to cooperate in this time of uncertainty. Both Korea and ASEAN share the same sentiment for the ongoing China and the US power competition. So Korea is pursuing the middle power diplomacy. The basic of middle power diplomacy is to make friendly coalition among the like-minded countries in order to promote the rule-based international order. So I think for Korea, ASEAN is not only relevant, but also a very essential partner for making its middle power diplomacy possible.
Right, I see. All right, Professor Kim, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Joanne over in Singapore, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we end this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. We'll be back same time tomorrow.